Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Talkin, obviously. And today we're going to talk about, we're going to move on from feminist tropes into the tropes mostly dealing with African American experience in film, but generally we just kind of talk about these as sort of the multicultural tropes. So a lot of this stuff is going to be very similar to the feminist tropes. It's just we're dealing with race instead of gender, but answering a lot of the same questions. I just had some stuff fall down. That's no good. But anyway, to continue on with this, many of those tropes, we had obviously all these tropes up here for feminist tropes, things like the manic pixie dream girl, the enchantress, the wise old woman, fridging. And again, the big thing is that used in any single film, it's not like it's some huge problem. But if all films of this type if that's just the only treatment that women get in films, which for a long time was pretty much true, where they were just fitting into these things, especially like the damsel in distress, then that's problematic. And we're going to see the same thing with these ones down here under multicultural slash African American tropes. So the ones we have here include the magical Negro, white man's burden, white male as hero, token minority, evil colonialist, and the whitest black guy slash Uncle Tom. And these are the kinds of things we're going to look at. We're going to see, for instance, let me actually just go to the next slide. But nope, that's the women one. Here is the one that we need. So, for instance, if you've probably seen some of these, but things like The Legend of Bagger Vance. It's a pretty good movie. It's actually one of the ones that some of you might have watched. I don't remember if anyone watched it this year, though, but it was in our first review of the semester, the one where it was about reviewing one that had kind of low ratings, had a really big cast to it because really like acclaimed cast to it because it had Charlize Theron, Matt Damon, and Will Smith. So three obviously A-list actors in it, and it's a pretty good movie, but it definitely has times where it drags a bit. But in this one, Matt Damon plays a golfer that basically was taken over, and I think it's in World War One or Two. I forget which World War he goes off and fights in. I think it must be World War One because I think we're in the midst of the Depression when the story's going. Yeah, we are. It's got to be right. So he fights in World War One. He comes back shell shocked, part of the lost generation, like you probably talked about in English too. What I'm talking about currently with my sophomores, the whole idea of coming back, just being changed by his experiences in World War One, and he's can't really golf anymore. He's just like lost his ability to concentrate on what he needs to do, and he's just struggling anytime he's out there. There's going to be this big tournament locally where basically he's going to get brought in because there's a giant golf course that was just built and it's struggling, and they're going to try to host this big tournament with Bobby Jones and I forget the other golfer's name. But they're basically two of the biggest golfers of the time period, and they're going to have some local person, this person who's, I forget his first name, but his last name is Juna. And they're going to have him play against these two really, really famous uh, golfers that are just known across the country. And Juna kind of struggles with this, and that's the character that Matt Damon plays. And just out of nowhere, this guy shows up, Bagger Vance, and he's able to magically pull out of the things that out of Juna that he needs to be pulled out in order for him to start healing his wounds, to start getting over the fact that he's got all these sort of psychological war wounds, to start letting go and just being a good golfer and just being in the moment. And he literally is a magical character because at the end it gets to the last portion, and like we've talked about with all sorts of films, but especially something like Kubo, at the end the mentors have to be pulled away. Bagger Vance is his caddy and is with him until basically the last 3 or 4 holes of the last round of this tournament, and Matt Damon feels like he's lost it. He's actually considering cheating basically because he accidentally was like trying to play his ball and accidentally moved something that moved the ball, which is a penalty, and he has to decide whether he's going to call the penalty on himself. Once he calls the penalty, once he kind of gets into that idea of cares about the game first and foremost, the integrity of the game, and just playing the game, enjoying the game, then he's back to his old self. And at that point, Bagger Vance basically hands the golf bag off to this kid that's been helping them, the one who's telling the story, and just walks off the course and disappears and is never seen again. So he's like this very sort of ethereal, magical figure. Green Mile, I actually haven't seen the Green Mile, but I've heard that it kind of does the same thing. That the guy that is on death row kind of has this magical effect on everyone else in the film and changes them for the better. So that's another one that's often talked about for this. I'm gonna try to go through the others faster because that was long. So other things we've got, for instance, White Man's Burden. This comes from a very problematic thing that's it's literally a book a long time ago, uh, and as you can see here on the screen, this is just from Wikipedia, but as it says, it's a book called The White Man's Burden: The United States and the Philippine Islands by Rudyard Kipling. Is a poem about the Philippine-American War, which exhorts the U.S. to assume colonial control of the Filipino people and their country. And of course, we did control the Philippines for a pretty significant amount of time. And just thinking that like this is where the name comes from, but it's just sort of the burden that like white people are just naturally better than all the other people, so it's our burden to like lead them. It's that it's the same argument that people that were pro-slavery used back in the time of slavery, that Africans that were in American slavery were not capable of living in as great of a society as ours, that we were actually doing them a favor by having them in slavery. This type of thinking, of course, is problematic in so many ways, but it's the same thing that we see here with this article, and you certainly see it in some films. We also then have things like the token black character, and of course this is made fun of here. I wanted to bring this up. South Park literally calls their guy, it says formerly known as Token Williams, but he's literally called Token Black. So like this is a spot where of course South Park is making fun of this, but that whole idea of the token black character, you often see these groups of people that just happen to be together, and they just perfectly match up with having mostly white people in a group, but you'll have like either an Asian or a Latino woman, and like a black man or something like that, and it's just it's a goal to try to diversify these groups in TV shows and films and commercials and stuff like that. Um, but obviously, if it's just, hey, we got to grab a black person to be in all of our shows, then most of the time you're probably not giving them, you're not really treating that character as anything but just an attempt to diversify without actually dealing with the issues of diversity there. So that's why token minority is sometimes kind of problematic. Go back to our things here. Got a few examples here of, for instance, let me actually go to the one here like this. The evil colonialist. He looks very dashing in his purple, doesn't he? But this is, of course, Radcliffe from Pocahontas. Of course, the villain, John Smith, is the one that sees it as, maybe they shouldn't be doing all this stuff, but Radcliffe wants to, kill all the indigenous people and take their land and take their resources, which should sound very familiar for what we talked about in this class, because we have the same thing with, of course, Colonel Miles Quaritch, our villain from Avatar, which we just watched, and it's basically the same storyline. And again, he is the evil colonialist. So is the business guy back there. I forget what that actor's name is, but he's been in a lot of stuff too. But these people are the evil colonialists. So this, if you're seeing this type of stuff, that it's people of color having to fight against evil colonialists. Again, it's not that these stories are problematic. It's just those are the only stories we get to hear. That if a story deals with a Native American group, or a group that seems to be like the equivalent of Native Americans, like an Avatar with the people of Pandora the Na'vi, that almost always they're battling some type of evil colonialist. And like even this is one of those things that even some other films get into. Of the ones that were on this list, the only ones that I thought you guys would likely know are the ones here for Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they bring up an interesting point. I would have only thought of this with Black Panther necessarily. But in Thor Ragnarok, as it talks about, I'll just read this from here. The film reveals that, contrary to the information presented in the previous Thor films, our hero's father was a galactic conqueror who established the Asgardian Empire through bloody colonialism. Odin conquered these other people. He went in and took their lands from them and made them part of the Asgardian Empire. and did that with the help of Hela, who of course is the villain who wants to continue that type of thing. And we see her as a villain. She's wanting to do more colonialist conquering, basically. And as it says here, thus the villains of Thor's past films, previously criticized as some of the flattest villains in the franchise, they're actually the ones trying to fight back against, the crimes committed against them. That when we're dealing with the frost giants, the dark elves, these are people that have been conquered by the Asgardians, and they're just trying to fight for their own freedom. When you look at it that way, then maybe someone like Malekith, who's the bad guy in the Thor movie nobody watched, The Dark World, the second one, which wasn't very good. But like he's actually not really the bad guy in some ways. So that's a big thing to kind of think of. Black Panther. Black Panther is the one that obviously deals with all these things in the most rounded way possible, which is why it is interesting. Black Panther does have, of course, this world of Wakanda that is this world of empowerment for people of African descent, which is something that we don't see, especially in American film, ever, pretty much. But as it gets from here, Ulysses Klaue is a charismatic but cruel thief who pillages vibranium, justifying it, saying the Wakandan savages don't deserve to have it. Don't deserve to have it. He even likens his country to his own personal El Dorado, or likens the country to his own personal El Dorado, basically, which was the city of gold that the Spanish were looking for. Um, Claw's not the main villain, of course. Comes down a lot harder now on the colonizers themselves, from the complicity of those who did nothing about colonization and continue to benefit from its unjust legacy. And this is the big thing here. We've got Claw, who's an evil colonialist. We've got Killmonger, who does fall more into the victimized part of these storylines. But then we also have T'Challa, and basically he's having to come to terms with his father and with the previous kings of Wakanda, who knew that the stuff was happening outside their borders, knew they had incredible power. Instead of doing something to try to stop it, just decided Wakanda is for Wakandans only, our power is for our people only. We're going to use our technology to hide, and we're going to have the most advanced, powerful society in the world, and the rest of the world can take care of themselves. And if the rest of the world is falling apart, that's not our problem. And obviously, that's something that is the way that's how T'Challa learns. That's how he becomes his higher self, is by graduating from the version of him that his father taught him to be, to graduating up into that idea of the higher self, where he realizes that his father didn't have all the answers. His father was complicit in a lot of things that were bad. And the last, Captain Marvel, tricked into being one of these evil colonialists because basically she's helping to hunt down the Skrulls, who are actually just desperate refugees, and the Kree are trying to conquer them. She, of course, uh, sees this eventually and changes from being a colonialist to not. So, having said all this stuff, these are the types of things you can look for. But the big questions are here. They are. How many characters or other races are there even? And one of the films you actually can use for this, if you're struggling with the idea of dealing with this in other ways, is the first Harry Potter movie. And obviously, it's not one where you're going to be dealing with the idea of race there, but the idea of pure blood versus mud blood. And that's their way of handling it, but they're dealing with race. Now, there is one interesting thing, and maybe some of you probably don't know this, but there have been stage versions of Harry Potter, and in order to diversify, they actually they've been looking at ways to certain characters that they might be able to change, and the one that they changed was Hermione. Hermione became a black girl instead of a white girl going to Hogwarts, and J.K. Rowling was very, very adamant about the fact that nowhere in there does it say she's white. And I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't reread the books to look. I imagine she knows her stuff since she wrote the books, but the big thing it talks about is that the only description it gives is that she's got sort of curly hair, which again could certainly be just a white girl with curly hair, or that could be kind of getting to the idea of sort of black hair. So that's one of those things that by changing that, she actually kind of fits in that way anyway, because as a mudblood, she was, of course, the character that you're mostly probably going to deal with being attacked the most in that stereotypically racist way anyway. But I thought that that was interesting that that was the character they chose to change. That Harry and Ron are still going to be those majority, white male kind of characters. They've certainly got their own baggage as well, with Ron, of course, being poor and Harry being, of course, sort of coming from an abusive home. But these are things that, again, Hermione is the one that has that other type of baggage of being the outsider to this world. So that's one thing. Um, for other films, does it fall into the idea of tokenism? And would your film, whatever you're looking at, would it pass a racial version of the Bechdel test? And instead of talking about like a man, I would say, are they just talking about like their suffering the whole time? And if that's the only thing that they talk about, uh, then obviously it wouldn't pass that. They victimize the higher rate than those of the majority race within the story. As I've got here in the parenthetical, for instance, in horror films of the 80s and 90s, there'd be, again, this sort of group of teenagers that would go off and do some silly thing, like go hang out at this house that everyone thinks is haunted, and they'd be laughing about it, be a way for them to, get away from their parents or whatever. And generally, the black guy in the group was always the first one who'd be killed. And it happens in more than one horror film of this time. So if they're the ones that are just there, we don't intend to develop them at all. We just need someone there to get killed first, and well, we also want to do some basically tokenism. We're going to try to make our film more multicultural, diverse, but then we always kill them off first. That's kind of the same thing as fridging for women. That if the only purpose that a woman has in Deadpool 2, for instance, is to be killed off so Deadpool's pissed off enough to go and fight the bad guy, then we're obviously not being all that great to our female characters. Are they there to support a character of the majority race? This is where we're going to get into our Bagger Vance and type of stuff. Or are they in need of help of majority characters? Again, this isn't necessarily a problem, but they need to have some agency to fix their own problems. That some people argue that white people gave black people their freedom. And in a legal sense, there might be some truth to that because obviously it had to be codified, but it's not like they weren't doing a lot to fight for their own freedoms. You can't say that Kennedy would have signed the civil rights bill or law of '64, that Johnson would have signed the one in '68 without without the work of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., without the work of people like John Lewis and other people that were there marching, that were there fighting. Um, we didn't give them their freedom, uh, and to have that type of attitude is kind of what this is getting at down here. That again, when you get to some of these other films, like for instance, The Blind Side. Blind Side is another white savior type one. To Kill a Mockingbird, that Atticus Finch has to be the white savior trying to fight on the behalf of, I think it's Tom Robinson is his name, if I remember correctly, or The Green Book. I haven't seen The Green Book, so I don't want to say too much about it. But I'm forgetting the actor's name, but the same guy that plays, Viggo Mortensen, that's his name. Viggo Mortensen having to be sort of the savior to help the Mahershala Ali character. I think I have the right actors for that. If I don't, then you certainly kind of get who I'm talking about still. But that's the type of stuff that we're seeing here. That's the way that they're treated, and that's the way they're always treated. That's where it gets into being problematic. So, sorry I went a little long on this, but there was a decent amount of stuff to talk about. I hope this is helpful. We're looking at the same type of idea, 4 to 600 words. You could pick from anything on that list. I know that I had, let's see if I can actually bring it up. I've already made this long, so it's not like making it slightly longer is going to hurt you guys a whole lot for this. It's probably under classwork. I forget what the films are for this. Well, I'm not going to look any longer because I am struggling to find it. Maybe I have it under feminist paper. That would be weird. Yeah. But anyway, I'll post that because it looks like maybe I don't even have it up. But I know that it's in my. So let's just go to my syllabus. There we go. All right, so I'm going to pull the syllabus up on the screen, and I'll point out the ones here as well, but I'll also post these. So the ones here for when we get into Introduction to Literary Criticism, the ones where, oops, I went too far. There we go. So the ones for race, you could still do the help, but if you did the help last week, you can't do it again. I'm not going to have you do the same film each time. You do Black Panther. Crash is another good one. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is a good one for this. Gran Torino is a good one. That deals with race, dealing with, I believe it's Thai or Vietnamese families along with a white neighborhood. I'm going to see if I can come up with maybe one or two more. I might include some of the ones that were on the list that we just talked about a little bit. But if you've written a paper on one of these before, I might throw Bagger Vance on there, for instance. But if you've done Bagger Vance back in third quarter, please don't do that one again. But that's kind of where we're at. I'm over 20 minutes already, so I think it's time to cut this off. Certainly, if you have questions, please let me know. If questions seem to be pretty common, I'll either make a follow-up video or a post. And I look forward to reading your feminist papers as you start working on this paper. So, again, same idea, 400 to 600, watch a new film. Hope you enjoy it. Bye.